Hi, all. My name is Ejeris Dixon, and I'm the Executive Director of Vision Change Wind Consulting, and I'm a longtime member of the Transformative Justice Movement. So, I would define transformative justice and community accountability in kind of a simple way of saying these are strategies to address harm. Community accountability usually talks about the actual practices that people use to hold people accountable outside of state systems. And transformative justice is a framework that believes in transforming the conditions within a society so that we don't need prisons and police and punitive forms of justice, but instead we can prevent, intervene, respond to, heal, and hold people accountable for violence ourselves. I don't know yet. I dream of one. But what we're creating, I believe, first starts with people having what they need. There is so much harm that happens that is often connected to people's safety needs not being met, people's material needs, people not having food, shelter, all of these things that they need to survive. There's another place around people getting the emotional, psychological, mental health support. So I think it first starts with a society that is not designed on domination or exploitation, but a society that is based in interdependence where we can take care of each other. I think it also is about a society that is not relying on racism and settler colonialism and colonization and heteropatriarchy and cissexism and all of these classism, ableism, all of the systems that privilege some communities over others and turn other communities into exploited classes. I think that an abolitionist society is a society where people are in deep relationship with each other and feel comfortable telling each other when someone has done something wrong and we do something about it. And this society leads to the transformation of oppressive systems. So something I can imagine is we could have community councils or tribunals, and when someone has harmed someone in the community, we can create systems of accountability where that person gets the support they need to be more accountable and to change that behavior. And prisons and police don't do that. They lock people away based on their identities. They lock people away to make money off of them. They make certain forms of harm that are often done by upper class white men less harmful. So we need a complete and total overhaul. And I envision an abolitionist society as a place where everyone has enough food to eat and a place to go and someone to talk to, and where harm is not seen as the horrible thing that shapes your entire life, but something that happens that we can deal with together. I think it's around building skills. Mia Mingus and the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective, they have this pod mapping skill where people kind of learn and think through who are the people they would call on if they needed help from violence and who are the people that would help hold them accountable. And their organizing model is set up from the notion or from the construction of pods. I think it's about learning how to mediate conflict. I think it's about learning how to hear when we have crossed someone's boundaries, learning how to be accountable, learning how to apologize. We have to build relationships with people who are closest to us, our neighbors. There's a lot that I learned in doing Cop Watch that you can apply to like figuring out how to intervene in violence when we see it, intervene in violence in our families, intervening in violence on the streets. I think that it also is about political action and challenging harm and violence when they happen within social justice spaces, and also recognizing that all justice struggles are connected, whether or not they explicitly deal with violence or not. We had a small project that I never thought of then as a mutual aid project, but it was, which was the Living Against Violence Fund, where people would donate, and we sold these buttons that folks had designed. And so many times when people experience violence, they also take a financial hit. They need to take time off of work to heal. And if that violence isn't reported to the state, or if you don't want to go through the process, there's actually government funding for survivors, but the process is incredibly taxing and sometimes oppressive and sometimes humiliating. And sometimes you won't even be deemed like worthy of the funds. So we had just a no judgment fund for survivors and surviving partners and surviving families and the roommates, friends, lovers, people who were impacted by someone being attacked or being killed. We also recruited businesses and organizations to be safe spaces. So if someone was running from violence, they could go into these spaces. We trained them on how to intervene in violence without relying on the police and encouraged them to be in contact with other organizations in the network. Sometimes intervening and being kind of a place where people would run into would be a lot for a first-time organization. So then we just train them on, okay, if violence happens in your space, here's how to recognize what homophobic and transphobic and racist violence looks like. Here's how to address all forms of violence. Here are some skills. And really it was a place of co-imagining with people, because many times people already had strategies. They just didn't call them strategies, you know? And it's the same helpful exercise that I think I was looking at my building. My building has a sign up around what to do if there's a fire. And none of the individual steps that I would do are impossible, but it really helps to have a framework. So I remember, oh yeah, first, is the door handle hot? So it's the same thing. Our voices escalating. Is somebody cornering somebody's exit? Can we ask a person to leave? There's so much that just shifts when we say, hey, this isn't okay in our space, right? We're really grappling with that because when within the context of sexual harassment and sexual violence, it's incredibly common. So many women, whether they are cis or trans women, non-binary people, people who experience gender oppression, have faced sexual harassment, sexual violence. It's not probably surprising to you all that prisons don't cure sexual violence. In fact, people experience more within prison, and neither do police. People experience sexual violence and sexual harassment at the hands of the police. So we know that those strategies don't work. I've been working with groups on creating safety teams and on how you train up your group to agree on what consent looks like. What are the boundaries between members in your group? How do you practice the skill set to intervene in violence? And how do you use the same team as folks who can talk through and talk to the person who's caused harm, talk to the person who's experienced harm, and support the person who's caused harm to go through a series of steps to transform, and ask the person who's experienced harm what they need to feel safe. And so I think safety teams are really critical ways, and increasing and encouraging safety teams. A safety team I know won't fix or address every form of violence, but there are so many instances of sexual harassment and sexual violence that if we talk about what the boundaries and kind of the guidelines and expectations are early, if people know it's all of their role to intervene at whatever step, most violence escalates. So I hope that this structure helps us address things at an earlier point. I would say talk about what the expectations are for people to be in the group. How are people expected to treat each other? What happens? Have a strategy for if and when harm happens within the organization. Have a strategy for accountability. Have opportunities for people to learn about what options and resources there are to heal from past and previous survivorship and to understand what you're doing together in the space. To build relationships, to build a lot of relationships, because our groups do not survive staying small. Our movements survive by thriving and growing and interconnecting. And to not only think only certain issues are issues of violence and abolition, but to engage in broad-based coalition building. Thank you.